Well, welcome along to the final instalment of Landlord Debt Advisory Week here on Property Tribes. All week we've been in Belfast at the offices of Landlord Debt Advisory, and for the final instalment I'm joined by the business co-founder Phil Davidson. And Phil, obviously we've had Tom joining me all week. Great to finish with you and get your perspective as well. We felt all week that this is such an important topic to talk about. There's stigma attached to talking about financial difficulty, and part of the whole remit of this week was really to open the doors and shine a light on this topic.
I think it's important to highlight we're coming into some very challenging times. We're still unsure about what the outcome of this Brexit's going to be, but it seems to be having, along with a number of other things, the Section 24 taxes, increased stamp duty. Definitely in the south of England, we see the market beginning to slow down, and we're coming into some what potentially could be some very challenging times for landlords.
Indeed, kind of entering uncharted waters, because we could have house price correction, we could have inflation rising, we could have interest rates rising. Nobody really knows actually, but it's good to know that there's a solution there if landlords do start to struggle. And I think one of the things I wanted to start off talking to you about, Phil, is that when you founded the company, you were already quite an extensive portfolio landlord.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm sure that having the experience of being a landlord, understanding the issues landlords have faced, I'm sure that's helped you kind of tailor your service to them.
I think, I'm sure you'll have covered part of this with Tom, but whenever we started the company, I had a fairly successful estate agency business. I was acting as an asset manager for a number of the big UK corporates here in Northern Ireland. Tom had a reasonably successful financial services business, and jointly we bought and traded property. And whenever we ran into a bit of difficulty, as a lot of landlords did here, 2008, 2009, 2010, whenever we went looking for a solution, we saw that there were a number of solutions out there, but we couldn't understand why there wasn't something that suited us. There wasn't something that was going to allow us to move on, because ultimately our feeling on it was that the banks had we had borrowed the money, but the banks had lent us the money, and it seemed to be very much the focus was on, well, it's you guys borrowed it, it's your problem to deal with. So whenever we started this process, whenever we started looking at negotiated, mediated settlements with banks, we didn't really understand that ultimately it would play out as it has played out now, and that it's now received by most of the lenders as a win for both. Ultimately, we allow lenders to move on in the shortest possible time with a maximum return on the asset. It was about creating an option. So we're very sensitive to, we understand, being landlords ourselves, still being landlords ourselves, what the pressures are and how people feel about their portfolios, etc.
Indeed, and one of the things that was really critical to you when you set up the business was to get the FCA regulation, because you are the only company in the UK regulated to undertake this kind of specialist debt advice activity for landlords. And I think that should give landlords out there watching, it should give them confidence, because to go through FCA regulation can sometimes take up to two to 3 years.
Yeah, it actually took us 2.5 years. There are a number of other companies that are regulated to do the mediation, the negotiation part of the work, but we're the only company in the UK currently that has a credit licence within its debt licence. And what that does, that allows us to look at the actual lending, the possibility of rebroking, renegotiating with the lenders. Our process is fairly simple. Initial contact involves a conversation, what the client's situation is, what their expectation. If we think that that's a situation that we can help and an expectation that we can meet, we then move on to a review, and we charge a relatively small amount of money, currently £395 per lender. So if a client comes along with 10 properties with one lender, it's one £395 charge. And what we do there is we do a bit of forensic work. We look at calling all the lending documentation from the bank, review that to make sure that the money was lent in an appropriate manner. Should the client even be where they are? establishing that they should be where they are. And really what we're looking for there is like a foothold in the argument. We're looking for something to go back to the bank with. And we find that in probably 20% of cases, we find some sort of abnormality. Once we've established that we are where we should be, it's a case of net income and expenditure and making sure that those fit within government guidelines in a way that is transparent towards the lender, but is obviously, we're looking at presenting our client in a way that's favourable to our client. And we do all that actually becoming a client. So the net result of it is, whenever we've finished a review, a client will know pretty much the high degree of accuracy exactly what the outcome is going to be, and then they have a decision to make. Is that something that they want to do at that time, or they're happy to leave it?
Indeed, and one of the things that we've been stressing throughout this week is that the sooner somebody recognises they've got a problem, and the sooner they come to a company such as yourselves, the more options they have to solve it, and that if they leave it, then those options are going to decrease. So very, very highly recommended that as soon as anybody gets into kind of a financial difficulty, mortgage arrears, negative equity, get in touch as soon as possible.
A lot of the cases that we're looking at now are historic cases. A lot of these cases have been in manageable trouble since 2007, 2008, maybe 2009. So because of the low interest rates, these cases have been allowed to sort of drag along. They haven't really improved. Being specific about that, like the north of England, we see portfolio cases all the time where the thing hasn't really worked since then, but it's sort of a rational, logical decision for a landlord to think, well, they'll sit this out and see what happens. But potentially where we are at the minute is probably quite a scary place, because as we've already mentioned, off the back of this Brexit, the chances are, interest rates are going to go up at some stage sooner rather than later, as the new position becomes scarier for the government than the old debt position and the historic stuff that's left. So what happens for these guys if there's another dip? So I suppose our advice would be, if somebody's in this position, if they've got a portfolio that just historically doesn't work, the Section 24 taxation element is starting to kick in, now's a good time to have it reviewed and at least know what your options are. You're not committing to anything, you're really just committing to have it reviewed.
No, I'm glad that you've once again mentioned Section 24, because the actual lack of awareness of that within the landlord community over the last 2 or 3 years has been absolutely shocking. And even now, there are people who are doing their tax returns who have got a very, very nasty shock. We've had a recent discussion on Property Tribes where somebody came on and said, "Oh my God, what's happened?" and they weren't aware of it. And you're definitely seeing landlords going into financial difficulty through having a much higher tax liability than they were expecting. And
obviously that's going to ramp up over time, so it's not going away. I think it's like anything, isn't it? People become accustomed to a situation that isn't ideal over time. The landlords, you become accustomed to it. The thing doesn't, the portfolio hasn't been working for a while. It's maybe cash flowing positive some months, other months it's not. But what you find now is that 10 years into the process and still no light at the end of the tunnel. Specific, it's certain parts of England, and we're having as many inquiries now, if not more, than we've ever had, to be honest. So it shows you that the problems are still there, and the worry would be for those type of landlords is, if there's another dip in the market or stagnation in the market, where do they go? So better have a look at it now than later.
Yeah, and I think those sort of landlords are probably the smaller landlord that, we call them the accidental landlord or the amateur landlord. Yeah. They've got a full-time career, they're not engaged with landlord issues, they perhaps, aren't a member of a landlord association, they haven't got a specialist accountant who's warned them that this onerous tax is in place now. They're the guys that are probably going to be most heavily hit by all these things that are coming, and of course Section 24, and they find out about it much later down the line because they don't think of themselves as a landlord, if that makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. We see a lot of that accidental landlord, the mum and dad investor, couple of properties. that really get pulled into the whole property investment thing because it was the thing to do at the time. It was the investment to make. But the other side of that is some of these portfolio landlords as well. It can be difficult for them to let go of the idea of the wealth that was on paper at one stage. So you can get a combination of the two. But yeah, I think times we are heading into what looks to be a fairly challenging time for landlords. In the UK, definitely.
We did touch on Mortgage Express earlier in the week with your colleague and co-founder Tom, and certainly at Property Tribes, they're not flavour of the month for various reasons which we've previously discussed. But I think that there's a large tranche of landlords that have built solely MX portfolios due to the same-day remortgage facility that was in operation up till 2008, whereby you could do a same-day remortgage, effectively buying a property without putting in a deposit. Absolutely. Are you seeing a lot of that profile of landlord?
We do, yeah. It was the sort of product of choice, wasn't it, for landlords that were sailing close to the wind in terms of their gearing, because obviously the ability to buy a property, and it's sort of crazy when you think about it now that it was something that was encouraged. It's whenever you think about it in the current lending climate, but at that time that you could buy a property, revalue it the next day, and actually pull money out of it. So yeah, we see lots of those type of clients. And to be honest with you, as I'm sure Tom's covered, it's a fairly straightforward process. It's a business case. It's the same as anything else. We've got to show a lender why it's in their benefit, or how it's in their benefit to deal with this now. And we've also got the evidence that the case that we're bringing forward from the client who's retained us is the best deal that's there for both parties, and as long as we can evidence that, then these things are relatively straightforward. Yeah.
I think it's worth just touching on those sort of portfolios, because in my opinion they're probably negative equity, or maybe just equity neutral. They quite often can be in the north of England. They're people that perhaps weren't that experienced, but then saw this opportunity and scaled up very, very quickly. We know there's dangers inherent with that. Yeah. These are all things where people have been skipping along and surviving. I guess we would call them zombie landlords. And they've survived due to the low interest rates and house price kind of not necessarily appreciation, but certainly it's been sort of neutral. That kind of is the actual profile of the landlord that is at the most at risk, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it definitely can be, because the other side of that coin is as those portfolios, you get further away from the time when there was money, what you find is a lot of these portfolios, the property, the quality, the standard of the property, there isn't the money to do the repairs, there isn't the money to, for the new kitchens, the new bathrooms, that sort of thing. So what you find is the standard of the capacity, the rental yield capacity of the portfolio diminishes over time due to a lack of money available to invest in it. So it's an ever decreasing circle. And we see those. We'll see a couple of those a month, every month. Except that fit exactly that criteria. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, I guess we're closing out this week here of Landlord Debt Advisory Week, and I don't want to finish on a sort of negative, down note.
We're sort of bad news guys, aren't we?
Well, I think I think first of all, accepting and recognising the challenges, it can help you prepare for them. So we would advise everybody to, crunch the numbers on their portfolio, have a proper spreadsheet, regularly update that, and just be clear what their position is. Because if you don't know what position you're in, well, that's a very dangerous place to be.
Yeah, from our point of view, we have 34 staff here now, and all of our guys are trained to engage with prospective clients. If somebody has a question, wants a bit of information, there's no problem with getting in touch with us. Somebody will happily spend 15 or 20 minutes talking them through something. And if we're not the place to deal with it, we're quite happily signpost them or put them into somewhere where, or maybe give them a bit of information that can help them out. But yeah, it just takes to be on top of things, and like a sort of bit facetious by saying we're the bad news guys. We're hopefully make the bad news a bit less than it could be, but yeah.
Well, go and look on the Landlord Debt Advisory website, because you've got lots of resources on there. You've got client testimonials. If you do get into financial difficulty, there are ways through it, particularly if you come to a company like Landlord Debt Advisory. Some people will say, oh, I can do it myself, I can negotiate with the lender. You have a view on that, don't you?
Oh, the pulling your own teeth thing, yeah. Listen, we would often get clients that say that, and I suppose in a sense you can, but in the same way as you can go into your garage and pull one of your teeth out, it's usually better to go to the dentist, at least for an opinion anyway. Yes. So there we go.
Fantastic. Well, we're closing out here at Landlord Debt Advisory Week. I would like to thank Phil and Tom, and also our tame landlord. It was Robert Wilson, who was came in earlier in the week and told his story, and we do hope you've enjoyed this content. And if you've been affected by any of these issues in any way, do pick up the phone to Phil and Tom and their team. They are here to support you. We'll put the contact details below the video, and of course if you've got any questions you can ask them on Property Tribes, because Tom is a member and he will be on hand to answer them for you. So all that remains really, Phil, is to thank you for your support of Property Tribes as one of our commercial partners, and thank you for your support of the landlord community, because I know that you have many, many conversations on the phone that actually never result in business for you, but the landlord goes away armed, knowing what to do next.
Well, listen, thanks for coming. It's been great having you.
We love coming to Belfast.
We'll see you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.